I'm a fifth-year student at the University of Michigan, and I am specifically interested in studying addiction using a rodent model. So I use different models of motivation in order to understand how males and females might be preempt to be motivated for drugs of abuse based on their gonadal hormones. And a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is not specific to what I'm studying. It's more broad within psychology. So we have different panelists, which will talk to you at the end of today's session that are from all parts of psychology. So whether you're interested in more of the biological aspects behind psychology, to that, as well as developmental and some clinical aspects as well. First, we want us to start today's session by getting into the nitty-gritty of applying to graduate school. Now, this session will be focused on applying to graduate school in psychology, but if some of you are unsure on whether or not you'll be going into psychology discipline specifically, there is other relevant information that will be in this presentation as well. I want to first go through some procedural issues. So there's a lot of us today, so I'm going to ask that all of you use the mute except for when you're speaking. It looks like everyone is already muted other than me. And to begin with, that's perfect. I do want to encourage this to be somewhat interactive. So you can use the chat function within this virtual Zoom meeting to ask questions or make comments during the presentation itself. If there's a specific question that you have that we're unable to ask via the chat or it's a bit confusing, then I'll ask you to unmute yourself, ask the clarifying question or the specific question that you have, and then go back and unmute. I'm sorry, and then mute yourself again. You can also use the raise hand for discussion that we'll have afterwards, or if you have a specific question during, go ahead and just interrupt me using the raise hand function. And then lastly, I want to ask that all of you fill out the survey if you haven't already. So this survey link is accessible right here, and I'm going to ask that you guys please fill that out. That gives us a lot of relevant information so that we can continue to make these sessions better moving forward. And then lastly, I want to give thanks to Dr. Crystal Carr. She was a graduate student in our program that just completed her graduate degree. She had the previous versions of these slides, as well as APS for funding this external outreach, as well as Dr. Cindy Lustig, who actually made this presentation that I'm attempting to take over now. Okay, so let's dive right in. We highly, highly encourage, for those of you who have not begun starting research yet, to start now. So there's going to be some of you here that are freshmen and sophomores, others that are juniors, and others that are seniors. So we understand that everyone's in a different place in their career thus far, and it's never too early to go ahead and start the research process. For freshmen and sophomores, it's really important that you start building your skills, getting involved in a research program at your university or summer research programs as well. By junior year, we're hoping that people are starting to understand which discipline of psychology or which discipline of research they're most interested in. For example, I kind of alluded to the different types of psychological research that goes on at the University of Michigan and all over the country, all over the world, really. And there are many, many different projects that you can be involved in and many research models. So we're hoping by junior year that you're getting involved in some specific research areas that you might be wanting to pursue as a graduate student in the future. This is also a great time to get more involved in the research that's occurring in specific laboratories that may lead you to an independent research project in future years. We know that out of the students applying to graduate programs, it's not grades, it's not the GRE scores, it's honestly the best indicative thing of a successful graduate student is how much independent research they did as an undergraduate. And beginning research early on will give you more independence in the laboratory and hopefully lead you to be able to do a independent study or senior honors thesis during your senior year of undergraduate studies. Now, these undergraduate honors theses are looking a little bit different nowadays because of the whole COVID-19 issue, but we really encourage you, even if you're in your senior year and not actively working in your laboratory right now because of COVID, to be reaching out to your mentors to ask if there's any way that you can be doing independent studies, whether it be analyzing data, giving independent presentations, etc., during your senior year. These are really great things to add to your CV when you're applying to graduate school, because again, this is what's indicative of a successful graduate student in the future, having completed independent research as an undergraduate. Now, with all that being said, I do want to let you guys know that it's not too late to apply if you're feeling like you're already a senior in undergrad and you really haven't gotten that much experience thus far. There are these positions called post-bac positions that are available for students who have already completed their undergraduate degree, but are not yet ready to go on to graduate school. These post-bac positions can be in the form of a lab tech, for example, that's been hired by an individual investigator at a university that's hired you to be part of their lab for a few years. It can be part of larger organizations. For example, the National Institutes of Health has a post-bac program that's available. They accept a certain cohort of students each year, and they distribute them to different labs at the National Institutes of Health in Maryland. These are different opportunities that you have to gain research experience after your undergraduate career has been completed that helps you boost your CV and boost your relevant experience so that you can be accepted into a great graduate program. This is extremely common in some disciplines and less common in others. For example, the clinical psychology programs have become extremely competitive. They've always been hard to get into, really, but they've become extremely competitive in recent years. And we're seeing more and more students taking a few years between undergraduate and graduate research to do these post-bac programs. Another benefit of these post-bac programs is the ability to maybe get some more publications under your belt, get a few more presentations so that you feel extremely prepared when you're going into graduate studies.
Hey, Jackie, we've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Can you read them to me?
Absolutely. So one student asks, how do you recommend obtaining a post-bac research position? And another seconds that and asks where they could look and do they pay?
Those are great questions. So I want to reiterate that the post-bac program can either be sought out independently, for example, you applying to an individual research lab at a university, applying to either be a research assistant or a lab tech. Oftentimes, those different positions are posted on individual lab websites, and on the website it will say looking for a laboratory manager. They're also posted through the university websites in different career categories on their career websites for open job applications. And then there's also the opportunity to literally Google post-bac research programs in the United States, for example, and you will see a whole host of different opportunities come up. Again, the National Institutes of Health has a great opportunity for everyone to apply to. It's quite competitive, but it's also an extremely great opportunity for you to get all sorts of experience. Now, to answer the second question, most post-bac programs do actually pay. People realize that this is like a full-time program, and this means that you're not able to usually work a different job during these programs. So they usually do pay. It's not an extremely high salary, but it's enough to usually live off of. Hi, Cindy. So
hello. Yes, I just managed to get here and get my headphones working. So that was what was going up. You are doing a fantastic job. Let me take just one more second to get my PowerPoint up if you want to finish answering that question, and Absolutely. Then I will swap in for you. Thank Absolutely. You so much for taking over.
Absolutely, happy to help. So yeah, as I had mentioned briefly, these programs do usually pay, and it should be, it will be advertised on the announcement whether or not there's funding available. But to answer that in a quick version, yes, they usually do pay.
We have another question in the chat too that I don't know if Jackie and or Cindy could answer. But one student asks, are graduate schools going to be more understanding of less research experience due to COVID-19?
So that's a great question. Even as a graduate student, you're constantly going to be put in positions where your plan is twisted in a different direction. So my recommendation for you and for anyone who's going through this, really all of us, remember this is a worldwide pandemic. All of these undergraduates are in the same position as you right now, is to get the opportunities that you still can. By that, I mean, reach out to different laboratories and ask them, is there any work that I can participate in virtually or remotely? For example, in animal laboratories, we often have video scoring that has to occur. And that's something that students can do remotely from home. There may also be different videos from clinical trials that need to be scored or different statistical analyses that need to be run. And we love when undergraduate students reach out to us and say, I understand that I can't physically be in the laboratory, but may I please work on some of the projects from home? And that might get you, even a virtual presentation at a virtual conference that's occurring this year. With that being said, I think graduate schools are being extremely understanding, but we also know that there's always a way to get involved, and it's really the individuals who are still reaching out and seeking those opportunities who are going to have the best chance at actually applying this coming year.
Yeah, so just to second that while I'm waiting for things to finish starting up here, the other thing, I think Jackie gave a really good insight, especially from the perspective of folks doing animal research. But for those of us who are doing human research, especially in some of the more cognitive or social aspects, another really great thing to do is to begin learning how to run online studies. Because I think a lot of us now that we have begun doing that, may actually find it a little hard to turn back completely, because there is something very nice about putting your study online and then you have your subjects in like hours instead of days and weeks. So
absolutely. So Cindy, I realize that I'm still sharing screen here. We can kind of tag team this presentation if you want, or I can unshare and give it to you.
Let me get up to where you are and then I can take it over. And if you want to pop in, or if any of the mentors want to pop in at any point, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Katie, I see some more things coming up in the chat. Do we have more questions while we wait?
Yes, it looks like there is one more. So does quality of research or number of papers matter more when applying to grad school? For example, the student has been in multiple labs that have never published papers but are very cutting edge. Would she benefit from leaving a current lab for one that will result in publications?
Cindy, I'm going to give that one to you as an experienced faculty looking for your own graduate students.
Yeah, so that is a really interesting one. That is a tough call. I would probably say for that one is going to be where fit comes down to being a really critical issue. So if you have maybe not gotten some papers out, but you've learned like a really good technical skill, like so for Jackie's lab, it might be something like learning how to do surgeries. That's going to be a huge advantage for, somebody like my lab. It might be more like on the programming or learning how to do neuroimaging analyses. So, I mean, really, what we're often using the papers and so on for is as an assessment of what kind of skills does this person have, and are they really going to be able to hit the ground running? And so if you have a different way of showing that, that's really what I'm looking for. I mean, in some ways graduate school is school, and in some ways it's like a job, and you're often in many ways sort of, applying for a job, and it's kind of like, whoever the person is the best fit to get that going. And also who do I think, even after they graduate is going to sort of make me look good by being awesome. That's kind of what people are looking for. Does that help? Okay, let me go ahead and see if I can grab the screen from you, Jackie.
Okay.
And so hopefully for most of you, it just looked like you just had a brief blip and you are seeing exactly pretty much the same screen. So this also comes down to the next question of, do you want to apply this year or do you want to wait? One other reason to potentially wait is this year in particular is that there may be a lot of programs that are not necessarily admitting this year. So this, I think, is an especially important year. We'll talk about reaching out to potential advisors, but you especially want to do it this year because if they say, our program isn't admitting this year, but we're expecting to be able to do so the following year, and this is kind of your dream position, you might have some tough decisions to make. So if your GRE is where you would like it to be or where your program would like it to be, then I would say, stay in consideration. If you are, don't have a GRE that's up to the requirements that you're seeing for your program, then you might want to consider retaking it. Although this again is an area where a lot of schools are becoming quite lenient, and many places are actually even not requiring the GRE. So I saw the chat flash, but I didn't see what came up.
I can moderate that for you.
Okay, great.
So one person is actually asking, right on the topic that you were hitting on, some graduate programs are starting to cut out the GRE requirement. Is it still important to take it, do you believe?
I would take a look at the programs that you're applying to. I think it's probably better to take it than to not. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I think it's important to take it. I would not stress too much about it. Like I know for us, even in our program, so even within psychology here at Michigan, every area makes its own decision about what it's going to do with that. And I know even for the areas that do continue to use it, it's kind of like, if it's really low, that's a potential red flag, but we do still take what we call a holistic look at your application. If it's really high, that can give you a boost. But if you're just sort of like, yeah, okay, I got a good high score, but it's within the range expected by the program, it's not really going to push things too far one way or the other.
Perfect.
So another thing to do is, you may want to consider a research job or a master's program. So there might actually be some students here from our advanced master's degree program, because I sort of hijacked their class session to do this. But my former AMDP student actually did this accelerated master's degree program because she was a fantastic researcher, got good grades and so on, but just has tremendous test anxiety. And so every time she took the GRE, she just would bomb the GRE. And so by spending a little bit of extra time doing the research, and the other advantage of taking the master's program is that it also shows you can handle the classes. That really gave her a boost, and she ended up going to one of the top programs in Cog Neuro. And I'm a little shocked, not because of her, but because of how quickly time flies, that she's actually getting ready to do her dissertation now. Likewise, high GPA, if it's not where you would like it, or where you're kind of seeing in the range for your program, again, this is a good place to consult with your potential graduate mentor, but that might be another place to show that, in this case, if your GRE is good, but your GPA is not where you would like it to be, especially in your later years. If your freshman GPA isn't so great, we usually look past that because we figure everybody has an adjustment period. But that would be a good place, again, to take a look at a master's program to show that you can really handle graduate classes. And especially if stats has been a tricky one for you, that tends to be a central part of many graduate programs. So that will be one that you might want to spend a little bit of extra time kind of bolstering both your knowledge and your credentials for. If you don't have lots of research experience, quite honestly, I think this at this point is probably the most important one. I'll show you sort of a pie chart later, but research experience is really what we look at. So do you have the skills? Can you actually get to work on the first day? And then also, do you have strong letters on that front?
Cindy, we're getting quite a few questions about, are 2 research experiences enough? What is considered a lot of research experience? Before you hopped on, I tried to allude to students showing some sort of independence in the laboratory, and it takes time to get to that independence. But from your perspective of a faculty member, how much experience is enough?
I mean, again, it really comes down to what did you get out of the experience? So if you were in a lab, you know, even for 3 years, but all you were doing was, let's say, phone calls and recruiting of participants, unless that's something that, like, you know, I have a big scale study and I need somebody who's going to be a study coordinator, I'm going to do that less favorably than somebody who maybe only spent 1.5 years in the lab, but they're like, I learned how to do these statistics. I know how to run it, you know, how to organize a counterbalance for my study. I can program in Python, you know, and set up my study on the first day. Like any one of those, even by itself, would probably beat out somebody who was like, you know, I ran participants and that's what I did for 3 years. I mean, that doesn't hurt, but it's not going to give you the same advantage. And the other thing is also, you know, think about what this is for you. Once you enter into grad school, you know, you're usually making about a 5-year commitment. So, you know, some people asked earlier, should they take a gap year? If you're going to, now is a good time to do it, because more than likely, once you put your foot on this treadmill, you're not stopping again until your first sabbatical. So, and that's about 3 years into your assistant professor position. Because usually once you start on the grad school route, taking a gap year between that and doing your postdoc, unless it's something like I'm going into industry and kind of continuing to build my skills, is going to be viewed less favorably. So I would say if you're going to start, now is the time to do it. So for those of you who are now freaking out because we just told you to get research experience and you're like, excuse me, have you noticed that there's a pandemic going on and there aren't many labs available at the moment? I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot at this point. We touched on a couple of options, but I do want to point out that on October 5th, we're going to have one that's a little bit more oriented towards what's your role in research if you are in a lab. But on October 17th, we're going to talk both about how to get involved in research and then also just kind of acknowledging the contingencies, especially of this year, what kinds of things you can do to build up your skills if you're not able to find a position this year. And for this year in particular, we're actually going to survey some of our faculty and say, what kind of skills would you like to have people, you know, joining your lab have acquired and be able to show evidence that they can do, what will make them an especially strong applicant. So just to go over the timeline, we called this Start Now because if you're a freshman or sophomore, you should be starting now in terms of digging up those research experiences. If you're a junior, ideally you would want to start, you know, sort of like at the beginning of this upcoming year, starting on researching grad schools and advisors, organizing your applications, thinking about who you want for your letters of recommendation. However, if you are a senior and you're like, oh dear, what you want to do is get yourself sort of caught up so that you're at least at this point here now of contacting potential advisors. You also want to be thinking about your statement of purpose. So, you know, it's like most things in life. If you have, you know, really planned ahead, you can plan it out and take it at a little bit more of a leisurely pace. If you are starting now in your senior year, I think first you want to stop and just kind of do the assessment of, am I really ready for this? And if you do feel that you are, then you want to make sure that you're getting these balls rolling pretty quickly here. By the end of October, you should have finalized your list of the schools that you want to apply to. If you are doing the GRE, send your GRE reports, your transcripts, and so on. Remind your letter writers. Do that frequently. Until we tell you it's done, just keep doing it. We don't mind because we need the reminders. And then it used to be in December, but now a lot of places have moved up to November in terms of when the applications are due. And you know, we sort of joke among the faculty that the Thanksgiving holiday is National Letter Writing Day, because that's when a lot of us sort of finalize those parts. But if you can get your part in earlier, that's great. Verify your applications. You know, these days, I think, you know, most things are done online, and so you should just get a confirmation email when everything gets done. But I'll show you later, you'll probably want to keep an Excel sheet just to track everything. As we have learned today, even electronically, things can go wrong. So, and then in December, you should begin to hear good news. Here it says begin to travel. We will keep our fingers crossed for it this year. This year, it might be this year, schedule a lot of Zoom meetings. If you have not heard from a program by the end of December, beginning of January, that you're at least invited for an interview, more than likely you are not admitted. You might possibly be on the wait list. So if this is a program that you're sort of really dying to get into, that again would be a place to contact your potential mentor and be like, so I know you can't tell me anything official, but you know, especially if you do have another offer, you might want to say, you know, I have heard from this other place, you know, I would really still love to come to your school. Can you give me some idea what my status is? And then all final decisions, so you have to make your final decision as well by April 15th. So the big question for some of you now might just be, you know, what area should I pick? Psychology is wonderful, but it's also very confusing because it's a humongous discipline, right? So we're studying things like the mind and brain and behavior, and we're coming at this from all different angles. So you really actually want to spend some time exploring and deciding what it is that you want to do. I think a lot of us start off just knowing about clinical psychology, and then we take, you know, a class or two, and then, you know, we sort of fall in love with that. But I encourage you to sort of like explore different kinds of psychology to find the one that's really the best fit for you. When you're looking for programs, you want to focus on what you are interested in studying. Again, you're going to be spending 5 years doing this, and it's going to be setting up, it's at least going to have a big influence on the direction of what you're doing basically for the rest of your life. So you really want to focus on what grabs you. Think about the career that you want to have and which program would be best. So if you love research, a research-focused career is amazing and wonderful and has all kinds of flexibility. It also has all kinds of demands. So if you don't love research and you love teaching, instead, you might aim for a different kind of program. If neither of one of those is where it's at for you and you just really like working with people, then you might choose a more clinically oriented program, or you might even look at social work. You want to apply to programs that with faculty members who have similar research interests. Sometimes the area that you apply to is less important than the research. So at Michigan, we often get people who want to work with somebody both in, like, I'm going to say cognition and cognitive neuroscience, and let's say my collaborator actually is in biopsych. So they could potentially apply to either program. They just have to decide whether me or my collaborator like has the better mentorship style for them, is really, you know, like, do they want to work more with humans, in which case they would work more with me? Do they want to work more with animals, in which case they'd work more with him? You know, if you're interested in aging, there are people along many different areas in our department. So it really is like looking at the faculty member that you want to do. Now, clinical, if you want to do clinical practice, is one exception, because you do have to go through very specific requirements for your licensing there. So
along those lines, one student has a question about the difference between clinical psychology and counseling psychology and whether the fields overlap. Can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, so they do overlap. Clinical tends to have still more, I would say, of a kind of an academic and scientific focus. So if you're doing a PhD in clinical psychology, you're going to be kind of looking into the nature of disorders, Whereas counseling tends to be a little bit less severe disorders that you would be taking a look at. And it also tends to be more practice focused. So rather than sort of, researching, so let's say, some of our folks in clinical here might do things like evoker-related potentials in people with schizophrenia in response to faces. And that tells them something about how people with schizophrenia process faces and how that might underlie some of their symptoms. But it's kind of, you can see how it's a little bit more of a basic science question than something like, okay, if I'm dealing with somebody with test anxiety, which kind of intervention is going to be the more effective one for them. And counseling will tend to be more practice focused in clinical. But you really have to take a look at it because programs also evolve over time. And so just because something is named something doesn't necessarily mean it's what they're doing, but it's a place to start. So as I say, you talk to your professors, your graduate students that you're working with. If somebody holds your dream job, whether or not it's a professor, some other kind of researcher, somebody else, and you happen to notice that they got a degree in psychology, ask them, what did you do to get there and what would be your advice to me? So again, the thing that you really want to balance, especially for those of you who are thinking about clinical, is taking a very close look at the program and seeing what it emphasizes in its training for research, teaching, and practice. Almost any PhD program, research is going to be a really big part of that. That's kind of what the PhD is about. Whereas if you're doing a PsyD, it's going to be focused more on practice. Some will emphasize teaching a little bit more, but again, especially for those of you with clinical interests, I really want to emphasize, like, take a very close look at this. Just because something is talked about as a top-rated program, especially by your professors and so on, doesn't mean it's the best fit for you. Actually, the person that I dated throughout undergraduate and part of graduate school made exactly that mistake, which is going to a very high-rated clinical school. He hated research. He loved working with individuals, and that was not a fun 5 years for him. So you definitely want to take a really close look and make sure that the program is training you for what you want to do. I really recommend this book, again, especially for those of you who are in clinical, because it also gives you a good description of sort of what the balance and what the emphasis of the program is. So as you're researching programs, ways to find them. Journal articles, so as you're working on things, like especially if you are doing a thesis, what are the papers that really grabbed you? My first graduate interview was actually the project that I was working on. I was using a coding system. I thought the work that people were doing was really interesting. And so, I sent them an email and said, hey, I'm going to be in that area actually in the summer of my junior year. Ask your professors, your advisors, your GSIs. We'll talk a little bit later about getting to be best friends with your professors and the graduate students that you know to get letters of recommendation. But this is also another excellent reason to get to know them. Come to office hours, is that let us get to know you, and then we will be happy to give you advice. In many cases, especially if we really liked our program, we might tell you to go there. Or we may also know some folks there who can sort of help you with the admissions committee. US News and World Report rankings, every year every graduate program is ranked with that. I would say take a look at those, use that as a discovery tool, take a look at some of the top programs, but that should not be your deciding factor. It's really much more about the faculty that you want. And then look at faculty research interests on websites. I really want to emphasize taking a look at recent faculty publications. Many of us are very bad about updating our websites. So don't just go for what we have on our website. Look up what we have done recently. I did some work in 2001 that was really fun and interesting and that I liked a lot. It's not what I'm doing this year. And so if you contact me asking me to come and work with that, it's actually going to count against you because it's going to show me that you probably haven't really done your research on graduate school. If you haven't done your research on graduate school, I'm not so confident about your ability to do research in graduate school. So again, lab websites, again, just double check that they're up to date. We're not always so good about that because we're too busy having fun doing the research to actually get around to telling everybody else what they're doing. Take a look at the requirements, get a feel for the program. When you're starting, oops, did you have something, Jackie?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Two things. The first thing is, as a clarification, GSI, which some people are wondering, is a graduate student instructor. They might be the graduate students or people who are teaching your breakout group sessions or classes if you're at a larger university. Some universities don't have these people, and in that case, it might be your research assistants that are in your labs, etc. Another question that we have is, can you clarify, some students are wondering about funding, essentially asking if they need to find some sort of sponsorship while they're in graduate school, or if they need to find a company to sponsor them while in graduate school. Most graduate schools actually pay you while you're a graduate student, as well as pay for your tuition. So I just wanted to put in there that as a graduate student myself, I do not recommend going to any graduate program that doesn't pay you. It's not a great pay, but it's enough to live off of, because you will not have time for outside jobs while you're a PhD student, let me tell you that.
Yeah, so one exception to that can be some clinical programs, again, especially the ones that are more practice oriented. So the good thing about the research oriented ones is that they also bring in grant money. So that's how they're able to help fund their students. Some practice-oriented ones, or if you go to a PsyD program, that's more like going to law school or journalism school, where you're more likely to end up having to pay. So again, I mean, it's a good question. Again, if you're going into a straight-up PhD program, more than likely, as Jackie was saying, you will get paid not a lot. I definitely discovered that I qualified for subsidized housing when I was a graduate student. But, you know, it's enough to make a living and, you know, do what you need to do off of it. So you may want to start with a long list of schools, you know, when you're sort of like in your information gathering stage. Don't freak out. I'm not going to tell you to apply to 40 or 50 schools. I applied to 18 and I thought that was a ridiculously high number. But this is just sort of like, while, especially if you're not really sure what you want to do, just kind of, you know, start off, you know, just keeping track of everything. And then you do want to begin narrowing it down. And the way you begin to narrow it down is you see which faculty are conducting research in the areas you're interested in. Are they accepting students? Again, it's something I can't emphasize enough. You're applying to specific faculty, not to a program for the most part. Neuroscience programs are a little bit different, but even there, like, you're going to work with 1 or 2 mentors and then sort of settle in with them. Send a cover letter and resume to all the professors you would think about working, preferably the summer before. If you haven't done it yet, start now. And I will talk about those letters and what they should look like in just a little bit. Check the publication of the record. How often do they publish? Do they publish with their students? Are their students the first authors? Again, most of us are pretty good about this, but not all of us are good about this. So, you know, especially if you want to go in the academic track, you want to make sure that your professor is putting out papers and that their students are putting out papers. Are they doing it frequently, and are they doing it in good quality journals? So are those papers getting read? And status can mean a number of different things. So that can mean, you know, sort of how famous they are in the field. It can also mean, are they an assistant professor, an associate professor, or a full professor? And that, I would say, is correlated with, but not completely determinant of what kind of mentor they're likely to be. So assistant professor, pros and cons, they're just starting off. They're going to be extremely active. Those are the people that aren't going to have as much of a track record for you to check on and see what kind of mentor they are. And when things do go south and graduate students don't get the credit they deserve on papers, it's most likely to occur with an assistant professor, because they're also trying to rack up their own points towards tenure. Associate professor might actually be the ideal, because then you're out of the assistant phase, but you haven't taken on 2001 other responsibilities. as tends to happen when you're a full professor. Don't ask me how I know. Full professors are going to have the advantage of they're going to be well known in the field. They're going to have a lot of connections. They're going to have a lot of resources. They're going to have a lot of knowledge. They may not be able to give you as much personal attention. And so that will be especially one where you want to take a look at, like, how big is their lab? So, you know, if you go to work with Eric Kandel, he has something like 25 postdocs. I think you actually do get to talk to him, like, briefly as a graduate student once a day, because he still makes a point of doing that, but it's like 5 minutes. Pretty much, you know, you're going to be supervised by his postdocs. So you just want to kind of find out what the environment is going to be. Get to your final list. Again, it's really all about fit, and that should be both from your side and from ours. I strongly advise at least 2 people in the program that you see as potential advisors. You don't know what's going to happen. It could turn out that you have a lovely interview with the person, and then, you know, you just getting along in the day-to-day, you have very different styles and they don't gel. My advisor moved to a different country in my 3rd year. So I decided not to go with her. They could get hit by a bus. You want to make sure that you have, you know, at least 2 potential advisors. And even if, like, you love your advisor, it's still a good idea to have somebody else to work with, because there will be days when you won't love your advisor. And it's just good to have another project to work on. It's also good to just get, you know, while you're there for 5 years, get a variety of training. You don't want to be competing with your PhD advisor for grants, because they will win. Should have a few safety schools, a few reach schools, a few in between. The recommendation given here is, like, you have 7 that are sort of like, these are schools that I think I can get into, and that I would be happy about going to. And then, you know, the plus or minus 2 on either end is probably not bad advice. That's still going to give you potentially more schools than a lot of people would apply to. I would say, you know, don't apply to a school that you don't want to go to. Is that just your phone, Jackie, or do you have it? On the interviews, we have had people do this and make this mistake before. Don't tell people which are your safety schools or your reach schools. You know, it's awkward if you are telling us, like, yeah, I don't really think I'm good enough to get in here. You're my reach school. Because if you don't believe in you, then it's hard for us to believe in you. Likewise, nobody wants to hear, you know, like, well, you know, I'd really rather go to, you know, such and such school, but if I get in here, that'll be okay. You don't really want to be saying that in your interview. Contacting your professors. Email the ones you're interested in working with. Keep it short and concise. I'll show you an example letter in just a little bit. But you really want to get right to the point. Introduce yourself, how you feel your interests overlap. Ask for more information about current projects, what they're doing, are they taking students? That's really the most critical one from your perspective. And then, you know, as the conversation goes on, you might ask a little bit about what their current grad students are working on. You may also want to take a look at their website. Some people say, if you're going to apply for graduate school to me, here's what you should send me. And in some ways, that's almost a first bar, because it's like, okay, if you haven't done that research, then, you know, I may look at you more skeptically than somebody who actually has done that. So this is a great sample letter. It starts off, greetings, my name is so-and-so. I'm a student in experimental psychology. Here's my university. I'm applying to your university. I'm really interested in your research. And you goes further than just saying, you know, I'm really interested in the research you're doing. But it gets specific, so that way, you know, the professor knows that you actually have read the research. And then the next sentence is what your personal research interests are and how you see those potentially fitting. And then this here is going to be pretty much boilerplate. You know, I'd love to find out more about your projects. I think your program would be terrific. And therefore, I'm wondering if you plan on taking new grad students. Attach your CV. that is important because that immediately lets me take a look at it and say, you know, like, do I think this person has those skills in the background that I want? And don't be sad, like, you know, we do get busy, we don't always respond. I would say if you don't get a response at first, think about what time of year it is. If it's in during a real crunch time, it's okay to send it, I would say, one more time. Like, send it, honestly, send it on a Sunday morning or a Monday morning, because we're just like you, and Sunday is like, okay, I have to actually get ready and get back to work day. So a lot of us do put in some serious work on Sunday and sort of like try to clear our schedule and figure out what we're doing that next week. And in many cases, like, you know, this year I'm not accepting students, but if I see somebody that I'm like, ooh, I would really love to work with that person, but I know I'm going to be low on the priority list for students this year, I'm very honest and I just tell them that, but then I say, we have a dual mentorship model here at Michigan where we expect you to work with more than one person anyways. So you should talk to this person and this person and this person, and see if you might be a fit for their lab. And then if you are, we can certainly work together once you're here.
Cindy, briefly, you mentioned CV in that. I know we're going to get to a CV more, but can you just give a two-liner about what a CV is and how it's different than a resume?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. So a CV stands for curriculum vitae. So it's basically the course of your life is literally what it means in Latin. And rather than being like, it is a resume and it's not a resume. So it is a resume in the sense that you want to highlight your skills and your experience. It's not in that you usually also will include more sort of about, you know, it is sort of like the course of your academic life. So where did you get your training? You might put your GPA on there. You might put like, so mine, you know, even now still has, you know, like who my master's thesis advisor was, you know, and what I did for that, what I did for my PhD, where I spent my postdoc. So it's a little bit different than a resume because it's like a resume, you're typically going to have that down to like a page, maybe 2 pages at the very most at the stage you guys are in. A CV might be a little bit longer, and it will especially emphasize any publications and posters and so on that you've done too.
Great. Also, someone's asking again about applying to programs. If they don't get into their dream program, do you recommend we wait and reapply, or gather experience, or try to transfer from one program to another? Off the bat, I'll kind of mention that transferring is not really a thing in PhD programs. Once you've committed to a lab and a project, you don't really want to start over by transferring to a program, and it doesn't really work laterally like that. So that's not a recommendation, but do you recommend that they go to a program that's not their quote unquote dream program if they don't get into their dream program?
I mean, I would say, you know, getting into your dream program, I mean, you have to, I guess, you know, think about how close the other ones are. Could they become your dream program? The criterion that I tell everybody is, you know, you should go to a lab where you can see yourself working on, you know, your project and your data in that lab at 2 a.m. and being happy and excited about it. Because you will be up at 2 a.m. working at your project and your data, so you might as well be happy and excited about it. So even if you think it's not originally your dream program, also keep in mind like what your dream program is might change as you go on your interviews. So do keep that in mind as well. Like the place that I ended up going for my graduate program, like I knew it was going to be up there, but you know, it wasn't until I really went on the interview that I was like, oh yeah, this actually feels like it's going to be a really good fit.
Yeah, I want to echo that as a graduate student who's gone through that process. I have a dream program. I'm from California, thought I wanted to go to a program in Oregon, went to the interview, didn't see myself there at all, was heartbroken because I thought that I wasn't going to like any program until I came to my interview at Michigan and absolutely loved it. So you don't know necessarily what your dream program is until you go there. If the research fits, then you should apply, because fit is somewhat, you know, few and far between. Even though there's so much research happening throughout the country, you know, you're not going to have that many to really choose from. I would say usually under 10.
So the application process itself, the usual pieces are a statement of purpose, and we'll talk more about this because this is probably the most important part of your whole application. Transcripts, letters of recommendation, I would say this is probably the second most important part. GREs, and then they'll usually just be like some standard forms, a university application, there might be a department application, your CV, as Jackie mentioned, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then if you have a writing sample, if you have done a thesis or if you've written a paper for a class that you're really proud of, then that might be something to attach as well, because writing is probably one of the most challenging things for many graduate students. It's probably tied with stats. And so if you can show me that you're good at either one or both of those, then that's valuable. And honestly, writing is harder to teach than stats. So if you're good at it, I would definitely show it off. Getting organized, especially if you're applying to a lot of programs, get all your documents in one place, keep things organized. This will also help you in keeping your letter writers organized because you can hand them with a simple packet. And especially if you are just getting started now as a senior, literally like plan this out like a class. Like it will take you a while if you're really taking the time that you need to on your statement of purpose and so on, and really researching these schools. It's going to take a good chunk of time. Again, approximate criteria for admissions. I stole a slide from Crystal Carr before, so I'm not sure where she got the numbers, but I would say as a rough approximation, it's actually pretty good. You can see research experience is the biggest one. GRE, again, many programs may not even require it anymore. And even for those of us that do, it's sort of a, if it's really good or it's really bad, we notice that. But otherwise, it's really not weighted all that much. Curriculars, extracurriculars, if they're DEI related, I would say at this point that probably gives you a particular edge. The other thing I would say about extracurriculars, just like when you guys were asking about lab experience, I'm going to be more impressed by somebody who has shown that they take a leadership role in something, you know, they're the president of something or they started some organization, than somebody who has like a laundry list of 8 different things that they were just a member of. Jackie, did you have something?
Yeah, sorry, I keep interrupting.
No, it's great.
Before we get too far away from it, the writing sample that you had mentioned, what about style? For example, do you care do you care if it's APA styled or if it's ULW or film analysis-esque? Do you care about style, or should it just be not too personal?
I would say not too personal. Yeah. So please, you know, not your diary entries. But you know, ideal, like, you know, if you have done a senior thesis or an honors thesis, like that's perfect. But even if it's something like a review paper that you did for one of your classes or experiment proposal, and, you know, I'm not going to be looking to see if it's perfect APA style, because quite honestly, I can't do perfect APA style off the top of my head either. That's what EndNote is for. And so, you know, I'm really going to be reading it more for content and can you express yourself clearly?
Absolutely. And then along with not getting too personal in the diary entries, on the last slide, you mentioned there's a bullet point about not talking about your own psychopathology.
Yes.
I think it was alluding to a lot of times what motivates us as individuals is understanding things that happen with ourselves. So a lot of the times people will get excited and explain that they really want to study depression, for example, because they themselves are clinically depressed, etc. And really, even though it's called like a personal statement or a statement of purpose,
it's not that personal.
It's not that personal. So you're not supposed to go into that much detail. Yeah, it's like a job interview. You wouldn't go to your job interview and explain, you know, your whole rap sheet about your mental health. So I think that's along those lines. Is that correct, Cindy?
Yes, exactly.
Perfect.
So the GRE, again, I think we've probably touched on most of these points. I wouldn't bother taking the psychology GRE. That's probably just wasting your time and your application fee. And again, don't stress about it that much. Do a good job, but unless your scores are really high or really low, it's not going to make that much of a difference. If you are, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just add in, I have a unique experience with the GRE that I wanted to just share for those of you who have maybe taken the GRE and did not get a stellar score. So I did extremely well in the writing. I did not do as well in the math as I had hoped, and I was applying to behavioral neuroscience and neuroscience programs and biopsychology programs. I went to one of my letter writers, two of them actually, and explained the GRE scores, and both of them said, well, I've seen you do lab math before. I don't know how you got that score on your math GRE. So they actually offered to write in my letters of recommendation. I know they said, I don't believe that the score that Jacqueline received on her GRE is indicative of her ability to do laboratory math and her work ethic, etc. So you can be open and honest with your letter writers, and even in your own personal statement, and acknowledge the fact that your GRE score was not stellar, but you'd rather that these people look at your extremely wide range of research experience and see you as a great candidate anyways. So do not panic if you did not get a great GRE score. You've already taken it. Just talk about it and be confident with your other aspects of your application.
Yeah, I would say, I know in our admissions committee in CCN, the only person who cares really about the GRE score is the person who does math psychology. If you don't get a good quant score, then, he does give that a little bit of fishy eye, but the rest of us are like, okay, whatever, let me take a look at the research statement.
Mm-hmm. And in the personal statements, how stylistic can they be? Or is it supposed to be just a normal essay? That's what one of the students is asking.
So unless, I would say, if you're going to do something that's a little bit more exciting, definitely get a lot of feedback from faculty and stuff on it. Some people can pull that off, but unless you're really very good and very confident about it, I would say stick with the facts. You can be a good writer of facts, but yeah, if you sound like you're writing for Wired magazine or something like that, it may not be the best. So, a good structure is just sort of, again, how psychology excites you, your background and preparation. Again, a personal intro, you can say why something interests you. I study aging, and so I do get a lot of people who say that they're interested in it because of a family member who has Alzheimer's disease or something along those lines. So that's okay, but as Jackie was saying before, unfortunately, it's probably not going to help you out. If you have depression or ADHD, and that's something, and talking about that as a struggle. I'm just going to be blunt and say, if you are dealing with those things, if you're in a graduate program, we will do everything we can to support you and help you out with that. But honestly, it is not going to help you in the application process itself at most places. So where you really want to talk the most is your research experience, your specific interests, and you want to make it clear to me that you understood what you did in the lab and how that maps onto the research interests and activities of the faculty that you're going to be working with. Your plans for grad school, you can be a little bit amorphous here, in some ways being too definitive about this, unless you've really talked to your prospective mentors and sort of mapped out a plan for that, might be going a little too far. Because if it sounds like you only want to do X and I'm doing Y, then I might wonder a little bit about the fit. Plans beyond grad school, mostly you just want to say, do you want to do a postdoc? Do you see yourself in a non-academic position? Do you see yourself becoming a professor? And why this school in particular, especially talk here about, again, identify the person that you see as being your primary advisor, especially if you've talked to them a lot, but it is also a good idea to name a couple other people who you might work with as well.
Dr. Lustig?
Yes.
Would plans beyond grad school, does that impact how people look at it? If I say I am not intending to do a postdoc and go into academia, am I going to get people who are all about that frowning on it?
So I would say ideally no. Realistically, probably. Realistically, your safest bet is to say that you want to become a professor, because we're just as vain as everybody else and like to make, you know, mini-me's. Again, so let's say if you're applying to the lab of somebody, so I'll say this name because I'm pretty sure you will know it, but maybe not everybody. So Russ Poldrack. So this is somebody who's a cognitive neuroscientist. He's a neuroimager, but he also does like a lot of things that are very data sciencey. I would say probably more people from his lab go on to work at like Google and, you know, Facebook and things like that. So he wouldn't mind that. But unless, you know, you're pretty sure that the person has a track record of training that way and that's what they like and encourage. Yeah, so like Jim Haxby is another person who just does a lot of computer science stuff. And so if you say, you know, I'm going to go into computer science, he doesn't care. But if you don't know that, be on the safe side. And yeah, probably saying that you want to go into academia is that's your safe bet.
Thank you.
As a graduate student, your ideas of what you want to do are going to change.
Yes.
So I thought I wanted to be a PI myself. I've thought I'm over this, I'm going to industry. Oh, I want to be a consultant. No, I want to be a lecturer. You're going to change your mind because you're going to continue to get motivated, and your research interests and your interests in life and lifestyle are going to change over the course of 5 years. This is even a longer time than you've spent in undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time to change your mind. So don't rule out being a faculty member. And yeah, to echo what Cindy said, I think definitely say that. You definitely, as someone on the app, someone who's been on the admission committee for biopsychology, you need to say that you want to do that in the future.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I think once people are in the program, then we're much more supportive of them if they do decide to go in another direction. But unless you've got a really cool plan, stick with the safe one.
Absolutely. And while you're on this topic, Cindy, can you add in, or maybe I can just chime in and explain this. Some people are asking about how they should talk about their big research questions or their main motivation of going to graduate school, and whether or not they should include these things. I want to be clear that your statement of purpose can change slightly for each school. So
Yes.
I saved a draft of each individual school. So every single statement of purpose, I got to write, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm applying to your school as my top school, even if it wasn't my top school. I also changed my research interest by a few words to make sure that it met the interests of the 2 or 3 main faculty members that I wanted to work with at that school. So you're going to write your statement of purpose over and over again, keeping the key parts of your background, but changing your interests and what type of program it is.
Yeah, so the 2 things that I will just emphasize from the tips that we have here, and I'll show you some examples of this in just a little bit. Show, don't tell, don't be arrogant. Don't tell me that you're, you know, the greatest and that you're super prepared for this. Like, what I want to be able to do is, again, I'm a scientist, show me the data, I will draw that judgment for myself. And have multiple people read it. And again, especially people who have served on admissions committees and can tell you what has worked and not before. The other thing I just want to note, especially for those of you who are from underrepresented groups, the Spark Society is actually run by my friend Ayanna Thomas. And they are really into helping undergraduates, again, especially from underrepresented groups, get mentorship. So this one is actually open to all undergrads. So literally, if you have a personal statement, this person has bravely volunteered himself to be the collector of them. And then they are right now in the process of hooking people up with mentors like in their field to help them out with their personal statements. So I really encourage you to take advantage of that. So this is a personal statement that is full of don'ts. Psychology has always been of particular interest to me. Like, that's an empty statement. It doesn't tell me anything. It better be of interest to you or you should not be applying to graduate school. I've commonly emphasized with and wish to help others. Again, even for a clinical program, that's not what they want to hear, especially if it's a PhD in a clinical science type program. While attending Exeter University, I took several classes related to close and romantic relationships. That's okay, but again, it's not really specific. It's not telling me that you got deeply into those. I believe that I'm prepared to attend graduate school at your university due to my hard work ethic and academic success. I see statements like this a lot, and quite honestly, it's a turnoff. Again, show me your hard work ethic and your academic success by describing your lab activities and showing me that on your CV. Your GPA, you don't need to tell me. I will see that. And again, this is just kind of like this kind of arrogant statement. This is mostly a do. So this is something like, so somebody asked, can you be a little stylistic? This is somewhere where, like somebody started off with kind of a fun opening statement, but I would say is a little bit more on the stylistic side. I've gained a wealth of knowledge from two unexpected sources, the female long Evans rat and the vaginal photoplasmiograph. So, we have rats and vaginas. I mean, who's not interested in that? So that's certainly a good way to get people's attention. But, here then you can see like, they really dove in. And so, so now they're telling me, okay, I spent 2 years. Oh, okay, they mentioned this, person's name. Like maybe I know that person. So now you've attracted my interest. And then what I like about this here is, here's my initial experiment that I did as part of a course, and I continued this as part of an independent research project. So that shows me that you can like maintain attention to a project and you can build on it over time, which you're going to be doing a lot of in graduate school. They talk about specifically the skills that they obtained from that. Their letter writer should hopefully expand on that. And then they say specifically what they learned from it. So now I know like you weren't just running rats, you actually understood your project, you understood what the question was. And then they move on as a part of my most extensive project. And then here, like, your next 2 paragraphs should really be about, here's what I learned, here's the skills that I acquired. This was one was put up as dues. I actually took this one out from the slide that Crystal had before. Because again, this kind of get to the thing of like, of show, don't tell, this very first sentence. But you can say, like, again, mention the laboratory, how you got interested. And again, here, I would say add a few sentences on what you did so I know you understood this project. And then I'd like to apply my knowledge and behavior or fascination with hormone brain behavior relationships to the study of human sexual behavior, and then more in the specific topics. So this is somebody, so for some of you, you might be in a lab now where you're picking up research skills, but it isn't exactly what you want to do. So maybe you're doing animal research and you want to do human research. Maybe you're doing cognitive neuro research, but you really want to do clinical or you want to do social. That's okay, but just talk about the skills that you've learned along the way and sort of how it's developed your interest and your ability to do what it is that you want to do.
I think that's especially important when you're going between research models. For example, I study addiction and I thought that I wanted to work with humans. So my first kind of set of research experiences were with humans, and then I moved to animals. And so I explained that while this was great experience, it solidified that I do want to work with an animal model in the future, and I don't need to take that time during graduate school to figure that out. So always phrase it so that you learn something from it, and now it's put you in a better position for the program you're applying to.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I will just say now, partially because I see a couple of you like hanging out at the bottom of my screen. So any of the other graduate students and mentors should feel free to pop in at any time that you would like to as well, because I know we're going a little bit longer than we had planned, but I think it's because we're getting great questions and discussion, so that's okay. So certainly you guys feel free to pop in if you'd like. So who to ask? Obviously a professor at GSI who knows you well, plan ahead. They don't have to be the person who is, so you definitely want one from the person that you're doing research with, but if you took a class, especially if it's a class that's related to the stuff that you want to do, and you wrote a great paper in there, then that's also a good place to do. And you may even want to say to them like what it is that you want them to write the letter about. So again, if you kicked ass in stats, have your stats professor write that and say, you know, that you help to tutor other people and things like that. You want to, when you ask your professor, give them an out, especially if you have any degree of uncertainty. The phrase you want to use is, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? Because in some cases, some people, like if I can't write somebody a good letter of recommendation, I will tell them. But not everybody is as comfortable with being blunt as I am. So, you know, some people may write you one even if it's not so great, and you really don't want that. You really want them to feel confident they could write you a strong letter. So give them an out. Over email is a good way to ask. If you may want to meet in person or in Zoom to talk about your interest or the programs you're applying to. I would say offer that to the professor that you're asking for the recommendation letter, but don't push on it, especially if there's somebody who's likely writing a lot of recommendation letters and they know you pretty well already. The other thing to keep in mind is that sometimes it might actually be the graduate student or the postdoc in your lab who you've worked with one-on-one who actually writes the letter. And then the faculty member sort of does some editing and signing off on it. And that's okay. Like really, you know, the letter is just kind of, what can they tell us about you? When to ask early. And again, send reminders. We have a lot to do. Some of us are more organized than others. So, you know, most people will not mind, you know, like I think one of the best things one of my students ever did is they actually went ahead and they just put it all onto my Google Calendar for me as to like, you know, making sure it got, you know, on my calendar like a couple days before the due date. And I was like, okay, this is perfect. I don't even have to think about it.
Dr. Lustig?
Yes.
For people who are interested in a gap year or gap years,
yep.
What is the time frame for letters of rec? So like for context,
oh yeah,
I know this, but other people don't. I've been in Thad Polk's lab for 4 years, and I don't know if I'm going to be in Thad Polk's lab for my gap years. And whether I'm in a new lab or not, like, do I ask Thad, yo, can you write me a letter now? And then in 2 years, I'll tap that.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you can do is say, like, if you're gonna do the gap year, probably the best strategy is to say, like, I'm thinking about doing a gap year. Would you mind drafting one now? And then they might update it a little bit later on. Especially if you're gonna do that, I would say then don't ask right around Thanksgiving because that's when they're busy writing all the other ones. Ask in the summer when things are a little bit more relaxed. And then, yeah, and then they can hang out and do, you know, and again, you know, as Jackie was saying, people have changed jobs. Like I have one of my former lab managers who's great, but has, you know, gone to a couple of different jobs. And I think she's finally found the one that like really, you know, she feels like, okay, this is my calling. So I just, you know, I just update her letter. I tweak it each time depending on like what she's been doing and like what aspects of her experience with me are the best fit for her position that she's applying now.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Give us a packet again, you know, organize us as much as you can. It should have the names, like you may send an Excel sheet or a file. You know, most of them at this point are going to be online. If you can use one of the letter writing services, like if either your institution offers it or I'm blocking on the name. I don't know if one of the graduate students can pop in. There's a service online that you can use, and the recommendation letter basically writes one letter and then they send it off to all the schools.
Oh, I think that depends on the school, whether or not the school allows it.
Yeah.
I forget what the name is.
I forget what the name is, but yeah, but there are letter writing services that will do that for a lot of different places, which is helpful. Give us your, what I always ask people for, you can't give them the GRE scores, that's probably not as important. I usually ask people for their, you know, at least a draft of their personal statement and their CV, and, you know, again, the info about who they're applying to and like why they're going to that school. And that's usually good enough. If it's somebody who's been in one of my classes where there are discussion posts, I'll ask them to pick like their 5 best or most related discussion posts too, because that really helps me personalize the letter.
So people are seeming to be a little confused in the chat, or not confused, but inquiring about, can you go into more detail about who the letter writer is? So
Okay.
yeah, so some people are saying, can my boss, that's not my research advisor, write the letter? I suggested that if it's their boss at Starbucks, that they cannot adequately talk about that person's ability to conduct research, so don't include them. But what about someone who maybe works at the university, for example, at some part, like maybe at CRLT, the Center for
Sure.
Writing, or of that sort? Can their boss there write the letter, in your opinion?
I would say it's probably best if you can get it to be professors, but if it is something, so let's say, you know, if it's somebody from the writing center and they're talking about the fact that, you know, like you won these prizes for writing on your thesis and you've helped so many other students do it, or if it's teaching, like, again, if it's something where they can really speak to a specific skill or aspect of you, or like, you know, so let's say for those of you who are in clinical, so, you know, like, let's say that you were, you know, led the peer counseling program or something like that. So that might be then, you know, or you ran a suicide, you were working on the suicide hotline, you know, and you showed like really great clinical skills there. Then, you know, basically if it's relevant, then yes. But again, the safest bet is going to be another professor, because it's also more likely that we'll know their names. And again, we're human beings. So if you're going for somebody else, just make sure that you have given them pretty specific instructions about what it is that you want them to cover.
I've also heard, Cindy, that if you're applying to a PhD program, you want your letters of recommendation to come from people who have attained a PhD themselves. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree that would be the best. Again, in reality, it may actually be written by the graduate student. You know, or at least they might have a heavy input, but you want the signature preferably to be from somebody who has a PhD. Thanking your letter writers. Again, this probably won't impact you that much for the application process, unless, of course, we get a phone call from one of our friends, you know, who is at the institution that you applied for. And they are following up on the recommendation letter. Like, let's say you're on, you know, a borderline case. Some people like to give gifts. I would say for myself, gifts aren't really necessary. And, you know, sometimes unless you really know the person very well, gifts can be awkward, because then it's like, oh, I have this really sweet thing. What do I do with it? So, you know, I would say, you know, a little thank you note, thank you email or card is nice. And honestly, like, what we really like to do is, you know, hear, you know, like, oh, I got into this program, or, you know, tell us what your plans are. Like, if we've put the investment into you to write the recommendation, that means we actually care about you. And so we want to know that, you know, you've been successful. So CV here, I'm going to show you. So this is actually Crystal's. I will say Crystal's is like kind of ridiculous in terms of the number of awards on there. So please don't be intimidated by that. So, but she shows here her, you know, academic preparation. And this again is by the time that she was a doctoral candidate. So she was well into graduate school by the time that the CV is. Yours will not look like this when you're applying. If it does, please apply to Michigan, apply immediately, apply to my lab. You know, so it talks about her undergraduate degree. So again, your CV is going to have this on top. It's going to have your contact information. She put her phone number on there. I actually recommend, because of bad experiences that I have had in the past, unfortunately, with stalkers, at this point, I would not put my phone number, especially my personal phone number, on my CV. Email is good enough at this point. Honors and awards. One thing I will notice is that, you know, she applied to several summer programs and she got in, but then they weren't the ones that she ultimately decided to do. So you can still list those, because that's still something that, like, you had that achievement of getting selected for. So you just list that as declined. This is really the critical part. So this is listing, you know, sort of in chronological order, or some people like reverse chronological order, you know, basically what the position was that was related to research, and then your specific skills, and, you know, who the PI was, so who the faculty member was leading the lab, and then a description of what you did and the skills that you learned. This is probably the most important part for most of you of what your CV is going to be. Hearing from schools, you'll usually get phone, if we're on the fence about you, you might get a phone interview, or some people do that for all of their applicants to begin with. This is before final decisions are made. It's usually short and informal. If they call you, like in your, on your way out to the bar, it's fine. I wouldn't say I'm on the way out to the bar, but I would say like, you know what, this isn't the best time. Could I possibly, talk to you, sometime later this week, and I'll email you to set up a time to do that. In-person interviews, this is a very good sign. Do keep in mind that interview is 24/7. So even when you are with the graduates, hanging out with the graduate students and relaxing and getting a drink, or you're hanging out at their house, you are still being interviewed. You just don't know it yet. And so, you can relax a little bit, and actually you should relax a little bit, like if you're still wearing a tie and sitting like this the whole time with your teeth clenched, that's not good either. But you don't say anything in there that you would not want getting back to the person that you're applying to. Recruitment weekend. You may want to look and see, for some programs you're admitted, for some programs that means you're interviewing, so there will still be a decision process afterwards. And do keep in mind that you are interviewing the program just as much as they're interviewing you. So you should ask a lot of questions, like, this is your chance to decide, and find out the information about, is this going to be a good fit for me? Am I going to be happy here? A big one is, are the students independent versus more indirected? If you are at a program like Michigan, a lot of our students have a pretty good degree of autonomy because they're funded by the program. So it's easy for them to move from lab to lab. At other places, if you are funded strictly by a faculty grant, you basically are hired to do the job that's described in that grant, and you'll have some freedom, but it will be a lot less, and it will be much more difficult for you to move to another faculty member if something doesn't work out. You want to find how many grad students does the researcher have and what their mentorship style is, and what does that fit for you. There's no one answer that is perfect. It's what is good for you. So for some people who are pretty independent, they might like somebody who has a lot of grad students and postdocs and gets to have a lot of independence and kind of do their own thing. Other people might want somebody who's really going to be one-on-one with them and spend a lot of individual time with them. What's the nature of the program and the people, collaborative versus competitive? I would say probably most graduate programs lean towards more collaborative, but it's honestly not true at all. I definitely know, and it also can vary by cohort. So you want to especially take a look at what is the personality of the class that is ahead of you, because they're probably the other class that you're going to be most likely to be interacting with. Now, I did say before, be a little careful about what you say. That doesn't mean that you can't ask questions about what the PI is. You absolutely should have, all of us have good points, all of us have bad points. And you really want to find out, are those puzzle pieces a good match for your puzzle piece? So it is perfectly fine to ask the graduate students, so what do you love working with this person, and what do you hate about working with this person? What are their strengths and weaknesses? If the graduate students are not, if they get really uncomfortable looking when you ask about, weaknesses, run away. Because that's a sign that they're scared of their advisor, and you do not want to be in that situation. The other thing that you can do is, I think it's a very good sign if the person that you're interested in actually gives you the names and contact information of their past graduate students, because those people are both sort of, less kind of under the direct control of the PI, still, and, sort of less intimidated by them. Even when we're nice, people get intimidated by us. And they also can tell you oh, now looking back in retrospect, I really liked this at the time, but actually I wish they would have done this a little bit more, or this really drove me nuts, but now that I'm starting my own lab, I can totally see why, they pushed that on me. You should get information about what the financial package is, what the practicums are, where people end up, but if not, then ask.
And one thing to add to the funding, because people were asking in the chat earlier, is during the interview, you'll quickly see how the graduate students, whether or not they have enough money, they'll take you out to like dinner in the bar probably. That's the time to ask them, do you make enough in order to do your extracurricular activities? What places do you live? Can you afford to live near campus, etc.? Those things are important because this is your livelihood for the next 5 years.
So in terms of making your decision, again, the prestige of the university probably matters less. And again, I think for some fields that is true more than others. Like my impression is that for biopsych in particular, like you can have some really strong biopsych programs at relatively smaller schools. So it's really the program that matters. Jackie, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No,
Okay.
I was agreeing.
Okay. You know, the prestige of the faculty advisor, it doesn't hurt. You know, if that helps them get their papers published and get the grants a little bit easier. But, you know, if you're working for Dr. Famous and you never get to talk to them, that's, you know, maybe you get a lot of great papers during your 5 years of graduate school, but you didn't actually get trained to do this on your own. And that's really what you want. Absolute stipend. Your stipend only matters in the context of the environment in which you're in. So, you know, a stipend that might be great money in Ann Arbor, it might not be such great money in Manhattan, you know, and might be amazing money in Iowa. So you really want to, you know, kind of see how it is, as Jackie was saying, like ask the graduate students, like, can you do what you want to do? Location, I mean, like if you're going to be depressed while you're there, then don't go. But honestly, you know, you're probably not going to get out nearly as much as you think you would. So make sure that there are some things there, you know, like, I mean, I went to Duke and it was like, you know, the beach was an hour away, the mountains were 2 hours away. Like, ask me how often I actually went to the beach in the mountains. So, you know, if you love your research, that's what you're going to be doing. The visit, I mean, it matters, like you want to have a good feeling for it, but, you know, like I would say, you know, actually like I would not pay too much attention to like, ooh, they threw us a really fancy dinner and they put me up in such and such hotel and so on. Quite honestly, like when I was interviewing, I liked the ones where I could stay at the graduate students' houses the best, because then it was like, okay, now I can actually see what it's like to be a graduate student here. Like I'm not just believing people, I can see, you know, like what my life might be like. Don't just do it because it's where you got in. Again, the interview is a day or two. This is 5 years. Underrated factors, research match, and the personality of your faculty advisor. And also think about, you know, your personality and what you can handle. Like my advisor's personality and I were not a great match, but, you know, for me, like her research match and the scientific training that I was going to get from her were good enough. And I had other mentors that I had a good personality match with, that it made it worth it. But I would say, you know, of many students that went into her lab, she got them all out with PhDs. I think there are 2 of us who are at R1 universities and still continuing on. The rest of them basically bailed pretty quickly afterwards. Departmental collaborations, again, you know, if people get along and intellectually stimulate each other, that's a really good sign. Departmental lab money, can you do the work that you want to do? Can you go to conferences and so on? And also, like, what is the lab culture and can you take time off? Like, you do actually need to do that sometimes, even though I sort of joked about the beach and the mountains. Like, you need to be able to have those mental health days. Caitlin, did you have something you were wanting to pop in on? I'm seeing at the bottom of my screen. Okay, I'm not here. So I'm going to flash quickly through these additional resources. We're going to send you a PDF with them because I would like to introduce you to the mentors. So those of you who were at our last one, so we have many different areas represented in psychology. So Jackie, I'm going to say you've already introduced yourself. Yeah. Abby, would you like to pop up and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Lucas. I'm currently a third-year doctoral student in the clinical science program here at Michigan. Dr. Lustig, is there anything else you want us to say, or?
I guess if you have anything to say, like about, either reassuring about your journey or anything that I missed that you were like in the presentation, you're like, oh, you need to say that.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot. I think just trust the process. I think, I came into deciding I wanted to go to grad school my senior year of undergrad, so very late to the program. And I actually did the accelerated master's degree program as well, which was a wonderful experience and really helped me solidify that I wanted to go on for a PhD. So I'm happy to talk more about that if people have questions. But I think trust the process, ask lots of questions from your grad students in your lab or who you have as instructors, and get to know your professors, because that can really open up doors for you.
Great, thank you. Lester?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Lester. I'm a fourth year graduate student in the personality and social context area. My research focuses on cross-cultural differences and romantic relationships, and I primarily work with Dr. Robin Edelstein. So I'm an international student. So if you have any questions about how international students go through this application process, feel free to ask me as well. Yeah.
Great, that's a great point. Myra?
Hi everyone, I'm Myra. I'm a fourth year in the Personality and Social Context program like Lester, and I'm also joint with Women's and Gender Studies. I am happy to answer questions about doing a master's program first. So I also, like I think Abby had mentioned, decided I wanted to continue doing research and go to graduate school my senior year. And so I applied to a master's program, and so that was a 2-year program. And during that time, I was building my research skills, taking graduate courses. It's also kind of like if you're not certain if you want to go into 5 years, these 2 years are kind of nice to get a feel for graduate school. And so happy to answer questions about doing a master's program before doing the PhD program. Happy to answer questions about being a first generation college student, being a working class student, or anything like that. I'll put my email in the chat unless it's sent out. I don't know. I'll put it in the chat. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Zin?
Hello, everybody. My name is Xin. I'm from CPEP, so the Combined Program in Education Psychology. I'm a 5th year. I'm doing research in bilingual child literacy, working with Dr. Yulia Kupferman, and I also work with Dr. Preeti Shah. So I am also an international student, so if people have questions, feel free to ask. And also another thing I'd like to say is that in my lab, we have EMDP students too, and we have lab technicians, like lab managers, these kind of positions. So if you want to ask about, like, if you want to take a gap year and become like a lab manager or whatever, you can ask that too. And another issue is like I'm sort of from this interdisciplinary area that our program belongs to both, is affiliated with both School of Education and Department of Psychology. So if you're interested in like educational psychology, feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, and I think especially for those of you who are in the combined programs, or if you work with mentors for more than one area, when we get to the discussion, if you can talk a little bit about like what that, sort of the pros and cons of that sort of approach. Susanna?
Hi y'all, I'm Susanna. I'm a 4th year in the social area. I study social media use and well-being, and I work primarily with Dr. Ethan Cross. I took 3 years off before grad school and actually worked in a data science startup, so have a pretty non-traditional route to psychology, and happy to talk about taking time off or paths that get you into psychology, even if it's sort of circuitous.
Great, that will be especially helpful for those folks who are interested in that gap year question. Nick?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Waters. I'm a 5th year in the developmental area. I study the causes and consequences of the academic achievement gap between children of lower and higher socioeconomic status. I went to U of M for undergrad, took a couple of years off in between working here in Ann Arbor, so I've been here for 10 years. So any questions ranging from what it's like to do the transition to food recommendations, I have everything. Let's see. Yeah, I'm also a first-generation college student, so that's another thing about me. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And Stella. Oh, Stella, are you there?
Oh, yes, I realized
Okay.
that I was muted.
Okay, it happens.
Hi, everyone. I'm a fifth-year grad student from the cognition and cognitive neuroscience area, and my research mostly focuses on using computational models and experimental experiments to study judgment and decision-making. I'm happy to take questions about if you're applying for an area that has more, if you're interested in doing some research and you might not have taken enough courses for it. Like, for example, I didn't have a very solid math and computer science background when I started my research, or if you have questions about applying to grad schools as international students, I'd be happy to take those questions too.
Great, thank you. All right, well, let's open it up for questions.
Cindy, I just want to add, I think many of the panelists that we have here went from undergrad to taking some sort of a gap year or working and then to graduate school. I only one who went directly from undergrad to graduate school, or maybe I didn't catch someone else. So I just want to point that out. If there's someone who's interested going directly to graduate school, I can give you the perspective of that.
I want to chime in. I see a couple questions that have come through in the chat. So one student has asked Myra what it's like being first gen and how the first gen community was. And I think Nick mentioned he was first gen too, so maybe he could also chime in about that.
Thank you. I didn't see that. I think it's a unique experience. A lot of times if your families haven't also had the same experience, it's hard to talk about. So you want to share the research, but you don't know exactly always how to do that translational work. So that can be a kind of point of tension. When I'm home, my mom will be like, you're just sitting at your computer, but I'm like, I'm doing things. I can't. And she'll be like, oh, if you're on the internet, can you pay my bill? And I'm like, that's not what I'm doing right now. So there's like those points of tension. There's also, as you might have already figured out, I think you're all in undergrad, so navigating applying to college was also a different kind of challenge. And you see something similar when you apply to grad school. You don't know exactly how to do it, but that's why you're in meetings like this and why you have like faculty mentors or other grad students who are your mentors to help guide you. Yeah. So it is a unique experience, but there's like first gen campus centers here at the University of Michigan. I think I don't know if you all are from the U of M, but I know tons of campuses have similar things. You can also reach out to other students. A lot of people, I think as undergrads, we might feel nervous to reach out to people and ask questions, but know that grad students, for the most part, we're always really happy to answer your questions, and we want to be helpful, and we know what it's like to be in that position. And so we're always willing to do our best to answer the questions or to put you in contact with someone who's better equipped to answer those questions.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo that, I have a very similar experience with my family and kind of living two different worlds. But at the same time, I did, just by fortune of being in a lab with a fellow first generation student who is very similar to myself, I kind of had a lot of great experiences. But even beyond that, yeah, something that I never took advantage of here at U of M when I was an undergrad was the fact that there is a first generation campus community. And there's also, so U of M for our graduate school, we have this diversity recruitment weekend too that also is available for students of various backgrounds that are underrepresented in college and the graduate degree programs. So that's something that's, honestly, I'm assuming a lot of different universities do, but definitely just search because it's probably there and it's just something that you got to find.
So for those of you who took some kind of a gap year, or even if you got the experience another way, one of the questions that's come up is, if you have experience that is relevant to your application, but it was obtained outside of the traditional academic environment, how did you handle that on your CVs or for those of you who've done admissions. So what they're doing is many of the people here who have served on admissions committees as well. And so they can also give you some good advice from that perspective.
Yeah, I think I can get that question. Although I came also strictly from undergrad, but I was in the admission committee last year. So I think I'm speaking with respect to my own program, educational psychology, because it's a pretty applied program. A lot of people, they do research on like what you've mentioned in this group chat, like adolescents, like schools or whatever. So this year we have admitted 2 or 3 of them. I would say they have working experiences in like NGOs like related to education. So these we would count that, and then I would say that's strong experiences. If you have worked with the population that you are interested in doing research for a long time or whatever, that would be really an add-on. But I would say like mention that in CV, but not to talk about that like in a everyday manner in the statement of purpose. So in a statement of purpose, you really focus on research. Yeah, but I'm not sure if that applies to other areas. But I think for education, it will be a good thing to add to your CV. Yeah.
And I would second that for clinical as well. I think when I was applying, I didn't have formal clinical experience, but I had a lot of different volunteer opportunities. I was involved with organizations on campus that really have a lot of the foundational skills that you need to work in a clinical setting were part of that. So having a lot of compassion, a lot of thoughtfulness, things like that, being open to individuals from all backgrounds. So I think you can definitely draw on those and use those in a way and build on those if it's relevant to your research, or using those as a way of explaining how you might have skills that apply to a clinical setting if you're applying to clinical. So I definitely agree with that and second that.
Hi, speaking, I just wanted to add a question on the topic of personal statements. I recall, like, so definitely we want to focus a lot on our research. I've heard a little bit of mixed information on the sense of how broad should your future research interests be, or how specific, in the sense like it might be, like if you're too specific, you might pigeonhole yourself into like just not really finding anyone that matches with that. So I'm wondering if it varies from school to school, or if there's more of like a safe, fast rule to like to go by on that.
I could take that question first. I think general, the way that I see it is to write it from broad to specific, because it's very nice to link your interest with the person that you're interested to work with by saying that I have this very specific research interest which matches very closely with yours, and that is a very important thing. But also another thing that's very good is if you have some big questions that you're just very motivated to answer. So last year I was on the admission committee, and we read a application from someone in mathematical psychology that was very impressive, because she had very deep thoughts about some very abstract things, like, you know, how does the mind work? How can we have this very theoretical mathematical model to describe that? So this is something that sounds very general, but having these big questions that motivate your research statement is a very good start, and it paves the way for you to go into more specific examples. Like, for example, specifically, I want to start with this, you know, more concrete research idea. And if you have very solid proposals or ideas for research projects that you think matches very well with the person that you're applying to work with, I would strongly encourage that you express some of those ideas. You know, not in a way like I am only interested in working with this, but you can say, for example, I could study, you know, this topic with this approach or something like that.
Thank you so much for your answer.
I just want to add on to that as well. So I think from a more practical standpoint, if you're going to apply to like multiple schools, you're going to make sure that you probably have like a few paragraphs that are generally the same. And then what really branches off is that 1 or 2 paragraphs where you say like, by the way, this is my research interest and this is how it aligns with what you are interested in. So I think that when you are crafting your personal statement, you need to be sure that you have a general enough team to match with the faculties that you're applying for. But then but you must be able to link it back to your own line of research. And I think like it's important to make sure that you don't I think it's important to be clear what your research interest and your fit is as well, because I think as undergrad, we always have, when I was an undergrad, I was actually like, oh, this person is doing this. This sounds exciting. I can do that as well. And then I think about somebody else. I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. I can do that too. But then you must think about that. This is going to be the next 5 years of your life. You're going to make sure that you are doing something that is relevant to what you want to do and not like do it because this sounds like something that you might be interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to weigh in a little bit on that as well from a faculty perspective, the other thing you may want to find out, and this will be somewhat correlated in terms of your independence, is are you admitted by the program or are you admitted by a faculty member? So if you are admitted by a faculty member specifically to work on their grant, then you may want to be more specific in your application, and hopefully you've like been talking to them over the past couple months, and you can actually say like, I have been talking to Dr. Smith about getting involved in this research, and like for our initial project we might do this, and then I can see growing it in these wider directions might be a way to phrase it. So I want to hit just a couple of the questions that have been in the chat, which has been moving quickly, which is fantastic. So 3 of them. So 2 of them might be a little bit more oriented towards Jackie. One is the difference between biopsych and neuropsych. And then Jackie, I don't know if you're the only person on this front, sort of what it's like going straight in from undergrad and sort of what people see as the pros and cons of that versus taking a year or 2, or maybe even 10 in between there.
Okay, so I'll start with the difference between biopsychology and neuropsychology. You're also going to hear neuroscience and behavioral neuroscience, which are similar terms. Basically, every school has their own idea of what they want to call their program, unfortunately, so it makes it quite confusing. Again, it's important to find the lab that you're interested in and see which program that faculty member has an appointment in. So for example, my faculty member has an appointment in biopsychology and neuroscience, and it allowed me to apply through either one. A big difference in neuropsychology is that also oftentimes includes humans, whereas behavioral neuroscience or biopsychology will be primarily rodent models or more basic research models. I also want to add in that if you're choosing between biopsychology or behavioral neuroscience compared to a just neuroscience program, which this person is sort of alluding to as well, there's a difference in the requirements of courses. So if your background is in psychology, you might do better in a psychology graduate program, whereas if you have a huge background in chemistry, neurochemistry, biochemistry, etc., then you might do better in a neuroscience program, and that might be more of the coursework you're used to. So again, it's important to find the fit and exactly what appointment your faculty member has in that. So I hope that answered that question. You can ask me clarifying if you have it. And then also the difference between going in, I guess a pro and con of going in directly. The pro was that I didn't have to do a master's program to get in. So in order to be able to get directly into graduate school, I focused a lot of my summer time doing undergraduate summer research opportunities and gaining the publication experience, going to presentations in order to fill up my CV. I guess the bonus was that I'm getting on with my life. I guess at 27, I'll have my PhD and I'll get to be done with school completely. I think that there's a little bit of burnout that happens around the 3rd year of your PhD. That's even more so sometimes for people who didn't take that gap year, because I've never taken a year off of school. It also is common to feel a little bit of imposter syndrome when you're coming into graduate school at 22 years old, and some of the people in your cohort are maybe closer to their 30s, and you're, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I'm just a little kid. So I think that sometimes that can be a con, but again, the pro is that you basically earned your position there, and you're getting to be at the forefront of your career and research very early on. So I've never regretted going directly to graduate school as long as you have the experience and you can get in. You're not going to get into a place that you're not meant to be. So I say go for it. Alexandria, I think that's who's wanting to go directly to graduate school. Get as much experience as you can and go for it.
Just to add though, no matter where you're at, whatever you're doing, imposter syndrome is real for a lot of people, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's something that just, it motivates us to continue to, work harder and whatnot. So yeah, no matter what route you take. So Jacqueline, you're not alone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also went to grad school directly from undergrad. I think it's great if you're sure that you want to do grad school. But if you're not sure, I recommend doing a master first or doing some research assistant position first.
So I also want to add to that, some programs have an embedded master's. So master's programs generally do cost money. Some you can get funded, but if you go to a PhD program that has an embedded master's, after 2 years you get your master's and you have the choice to leave. You're not supposed to leave. You're supposed to get your master's and continue on the program. But I highly recommend applying to programs that have this embedded master's, because it gives you an opportunity after 2 years, if you're really unhappy or you really don't like, research anymore and you don't want to be a part of it, you get to walk away with having completed a master's that was actually paid for, and you don't have to walk away having completed nothing or having nothing to show for the 2 years you just spent working really, really hard. So if you're not 100% sure, and even if you are, try to find an embedded master's so you get that master's on the way.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. That might be also another thing that you want to look at in the programs that you're applying to, is also how many people sort of, actually do complete the whole 5-year program, and if they leave, why. So like, I know my graduate cohort, just even within experimental psych at Duke, like 6 of us entered, 2 of us left with the PhD, and I'm the only one doing an R1. But that's not necessarily for bad reasons. It's because Duke is in the research triangle, and there are tons of jobs that you can get making tons of money in pharmaceuticals there. So why not? Was the answer for a lot of people. So, take a look at why people do it. And Rachel is very kind. She's one of our accelerated master's degree program students. And so she noted that she's having a good time in our AMD program here, and that's a good experience. And I think Abby said that she had also completed that. So 2 other questions that I saw come up in the chat. Let's see, I'll start with the fun one first. Have any of you actually done any study abroad in the course of your studies here, or done even a semester or a summer abroad? And what are your thoughts on that?
So I can speak on that. So I did my undergrad in China, and then I did a 1 semester exchange program in Australia. So I think this might be particularly for me, because one thing I got to know about like how the system works in the Western countries and how research is done there, like the IRB process, and like how labs are being managed or whatever. And then another issue is language. Yeah, I got to practice a lot. So these are the upsides. So I'm not sure if where you want to go out, probably maybe Spain or whatever. If there's might be a language problem. And then the downside, I would say, is I stayed there for just 1 semester, so it's not that long. I got the chance to work in a lab, but the only thing I did was like really basic works like coding, like videos. I cannot get more deeper into their research because of the limited time. And it's really hard to collaborate like after I go back. So these are some of the cons.
I would add in, if I was not someone who studied abroad, but if you're looking to travel a bit in undergraduate, I recommend trying to find a summer research program that's not at your institution. These programs are oftentimes funded. They give you housing on campus. So that's a lot of fun. And then you also get to make networking, increase your network of scientists at different universities throughout the United States. And that might be your next network to apply to graduate school with. So a common ground is to maybe apply for research opportunities that are not at your institution, let you leave your home institution during the summer, but stay working on your research.
I just wanted to also jump in that I did study abroad in undergrad, and I went to Spain, and I had a Spanish minor because I work with Latinx populations and do surveys in both English and Spanish. And so I was able to like complete all of my courses that I needed to complete the minor while doing study abroad. And also in the program now, I've been able to travel to France for a psychology conference. And so you can still do travel in your doctoral program. And then also what Jacqueline had mentioned about doing those summer research programs that are funded.
Yeah, there's also one of the great things about our program specifically, and I'm sure this applies to others as well, is that we do have funding for travel. So I didn't travel much as a kid, so I've done actually more traveling now as a graduate student than I ever did as a child. And so again, these are generally when you're finding full funded programs that have, these kind of resources, that's a really, really great opportunity as well. And I unfortunately, due to COVID, wasn't able to go international this summer, but my plan was to go to Ireland. So, these kind of things are also really great opportunities as well.
So now I'll get to the tougher question. And now I'm actually going to combine two questions because I think they both get down to the issue of there are only so many hours in the day and only so many days until I think about applying to graduate school. How should I spend my time? So one of them was along the lines of, especially if programs are making the GRE more optional, like, am I going to be better off spending my time studying for the GRE, like as long as I have average scores, or am I going to be better off building up my skills and stats and programming? And then conversely, somebody who's thinking of taking a gap year is thinking like, am I going to be better off taking a master's program or taking, like a 2-year post-bac research position program? I think probably the answer to both of those is it depends. But if you guys want to speak to what it depends on from your perspective.
Yeah, I want to talk about this choice between a master or like a full-time research position. Because the pros, obviously, for masters, you got to learn graduate level courses. Like for AMDP program, I remember you get to take the stats classes with the PhD cohorts. Yeah, so like when you apply to future PhD programs, you can high chance you can transfer those credits so that you can focus more on research in the future. And then for a master's program, if you look for research oriented programs, they do ask you for a master thesis. So sometimes this master thesis can be can meet one of your PhD requirements. So like for our program, I know that my cohort, we have someone who graduated from like a master program, and her master thesis count for her like first year independent study in her PhD program. And then so she got more time to do work. She planned to graduate in 4 years, but because of COVID, she would do a 5-year. So that's like a pro for a master. And then for a full-time research position, first, you most likely you get paid. And then second, you get more, like you don't need to take courses. You can focus on some like research. And then usually you have direct contact with the PI because you manage to do all these administrative stuff. So you could get the chance to talk to her, to them, and then establish new projects and maybe get it published. So I know that one of the professors in U of M, so Dr. Susan Gelman, her lab manager just got admitted to the developmental area this year. So that's a pretty good example too. And then for our lab, we had a lab technician. She was in our lab for like 3 years, being responsible for all these technical issues. And so this position for her is also like a transition. So she got to know, oh, I'm not like, maybe PhD program is not a good fit for me during this 3 year. So it's a very good opportunity for you to think about, oh, whether a master or a PhD is better for me. So she ended up with a master program later. Yeah.
Yeah, so I also, again, my 4th year here at U of M, I was considering to do the AMD program. And for me, it could also be that it's a financial decision, you know? So like there was the potential for me to GSI and to cut some of the costs, but I just ended up deciding that it wasn't maybe the best thing. And so choosing to do a post-bac, or I guess it was a 2-year project manager role, really helped me. And it's not to say that like one is research and one's not, right? So I worked as a project manager for a lab, and I would encourage a lot of you, if you're interested, to definitely apply for these positions as like research in labs and whatnot, because it provided me with a lot of valuable experience. Again, it's a little bit different, but you know, I was running the behind the scenes of a research project here at U of M, and now I'm working on those data as a grad student. So it really, yeah, the unfortunate answer is it really does depend, but search broadly, because there's a lot of opportunities out there, especially now. You know, a lot of schools are maybe potentially closing their doors for a year on graduate students, but there are so many projects that are ongoing and whatnot too, so.
I think the question also depends on like 2 important things. So I think the first thing that is about what do you get out of a master's program, and what do you get out of working in a lab as a research assistant or like a research lab manager. And then the second question is about money for sure. So I think like when we talk about what you get out of it, I think when you're looking, like I was in the admissions committee last year, and I was looking through the different transcripts. Honestly, when I'm comparing somebody who has a master's and somebody who has a research experience as a lab manager, they are the same to me, because they have like some sort of like research experience. They're both pretty good. But then if let's say you're working in a lab that gives you a lot of hands-on experience, you have access to data, you're able to understand like how the whole research program is like, I think that speaks more to like your ability to do research. And I actually value that more compared to somebody who did a master's, where, because there's some master's courses are just about taking classes, and that those classes might not be relevant for whatever that you're doing in the future, or not as relevant compared to the research that you're doing as a lab manager. But then I think also goes back down to questions like whether you have money, right? Because you might want to work in a research lab, but then the PI might not have money to hire you as a lab manager. And also the thing is that if you need to pay for your own bills. So I know of friends who actually did voluntary work for PIs that they're interested to work with for like a full year. So they didn't get money at all. They were just working for the PI to get research experience. And that worked for them. They got into a different program, but it was their dream program that they wanted to go to. So that was good for them. But I think it really goes back down to whether, and if you go to, if let's say you apply for a master's program, you need to pay money for it. So if you don't have the money, then that's out of the question as well. So I feel like when you're comparing between, you are deciding whether to do like a master's or whether you want to be a lab manager, I think it depends on what you can get out of those different experiences and whether you have the money to support either of those decisions.
Yeah, so I guess I will just add, as the person who's directing the AMD program here, just with both a master's program and a research position, again, it really comes down to what is it that you want to accomplish with it, and then also take a look at the program. So like our AMD here is very research focused. It's not very I mean, you do take a lot of classes as well. I think you just work a lot in general, but, it is very research focused, whereas like we actually have a proposal now from the data science group that they want to develop one that is very classes focused, but would work, pretty heavily on data science. And, we're actually in the process of discussing, like, do we just need to make that a whole separate program to keep people from getting confused? Likewise with a research position, as I was saying before, if it's a research position like Lester was talking about, where like you're really getting deep into the data, or like Nick was talking about, where you basically are another graduate student, but you're also just keeping the operation running, that's really great. Again, if you're just, testing subjects and you're not really getting your hands into it, then the master's program could be a better one. So it really is taking a look at what do I want to fulfill, and how does this specific thing, not the category, fit with that? So especially for those of you who have been on admissions committees, as I said, I think this is actually maybe the tougher question. So maybe this will be the one we end with. Somebody who has at least average GREs and they're trying to decide whether to spend their extra time studying for the GRE more to improve their scores, or spending it getting more stats and programming experience. I think especially those of you who've served on admissions committees, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I've served on the biopsychology admissions committee. Biopsychology is sort of its own beast, and same with neuroscience. For some reason, scientists who are heavy into basic science like to see the numbers. We have faculty who have been on our department for decades, and they are the ones who are making us keep the GRE. They want to see the numbers. With that being said, as long as you have a decent, I would say 70th percentile GRE, and you can compare, it'll give you the percentile when you take the GRE. As long as you have that, then you're in the clear. And then you can, from there, focus on you're gaining more experience. But if you're going to a neuroscience heavy program, a lot of the times they want to see the numbers, especially if you have a lower GRE or a GPA score. General chemistry got us all freshman year of college, dunked the GPA, so boost it up with the GRE and vice versa.
So our area, the personality and social context area and the joint area with women's and gender studies doesn't require the GRE anymore, but when I was applying, they did require it, and I didn't do so well the first time I took first few times I took the GRE. I didn't do so well on the math part, and I finally did do okay. But what I played up more was how well I had done in my stats courses that I had took, because that was important. It showed that I could do the things that I would actually be doing in the program. So you can find other ways, like Jacqueline had mentioned, to kind of balance it out. If you didn't do so hot on the GRE, you maybe have a great GPA, you have tons of research experience, you have great letters of rec, where I think someone mentioned their advisor talked about how they can do stats. It just like was a weird fluke on the GRE. So there's other ways to balance that out. So I wouldn't worry too much just about the GRE. I would maybe take that time to make your personal statements and your statements of purpose and your research statements speak more about you and about the work that you do, as opposed to centering all your time on the GRE. Working on I think we have like writing, what are they called? Writing samples. So having people look that over and focusing on those other things.
Yeah, I think that it's very important to take a sigh of relief when you know that it's a holistic application. No one's looking at one thing and just going, all right, they're out. Again, there are people that have incredibly high, I think that Cindy, you mentioned this, that like there are certain people that have really, really high GRE scores that are as problematic as really low ones, in the sense that like it doesn't carry as much weight as the whole application as it kind of exists. So yeah, I think that it's something definitely, just get that checkbox and then kind of move on if it's still required of your program. But definitely don't stress yourself out trying to sit there and get the perfect score, because there are some programs, I should actually take a step back and say there are some programs, especially in developmental, that I know that have GRE requirements. Minnesota, who's like one of our biggest rivals, they have like literally 95th percentile requirements. But I wouldn't say that that's common. And again, it seems like a lot of schools are moving away from that in general. So.
And I'll just chime in too that one thing I did is just set myself an amount of time that I was going to use to study for the GRE. And at that point, you know, once I was done with that, didn't stress out about it too much. That's a good way. I echo everything everyone else has said, but that's a good way to keep it from getting too overwhelming maybe.
And I would, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Abby.
I was just going to say one thing, you know, I did fine on the GRE, but I didn't have phenomenal scores. And one thing I did is talk to my research advisor, who has served on admissions committees and kind of knows that whole process, and said, like, these are my scores. Do you think I should retake it? It kind of gets an opinion from someone else too. So if you're really kind of questioning that, that could be another option. So talking to either a grad student you trust or a faculty member who you also trust. That can be just another way to get some more information. But I think, as everyone said, I think especially with a holistic application review, there's a lot of other things that are taken into consideration.
I was just going to add, when you take the GRE, for those of you who haven't, at the end, before you see your score, they're going to ask if you wanted to send it to certain schools prior to seeing your own score. I made that mistake the first time I took the GRE. I didn't do as well as I had hoped, and those scores got sent automatically. It saves a little bit of money, which is why people send the score automatically. But if you pre-plan to not send that score and you just tell yourself, I'll look at my score, see how I did, and decide where I'm applying to based on those scores, etc., then I think it takes a lot of relief off. And again, I don't suggest sending the scores without first seeing the scores yourself, because I made that mistake. Don't do it.
All right, any final words of wisdom from our panelists?
I was applying to schools around the country from California, and so being aware of the time difference is really important in when you submit your own application, but also for your letter of rec writers. So make sure you're aware of that and put that in your Excel sheet with all of your other information. Time zone is important too.
All right, well, I'll just read one last comment from the chat. Somebody said that they had just taken the GRE and they got to see their unofficial score before choosing the schools to send the report to. So a lot of things might be more lenient this year as well. I guess the last thing that I will just add as a word of advice, again, is especially when, you know, for your top, let's say 3 to 5 schools, if you have the time and energy, and it looks like you're getting a good response in your emails to the faculty member who you're thinking of applying to and having be your main research mentor. Like, these are all questions that you can ask them, because they're going to know their own admissions committee and their process the best. And so they're going to actually be able to advise you. And they may also be able to advocate for you. Like, they may be able to go to the admissions committee and be like, look, I know the GRE score wasn't this, but like, I've been talking to this person for the last 3 months, like, they've got it. I'm not worried about this. And finally, I will personally thank all of our panelists. And then, you know, for those of you who've had a chance to take a look at the chat, you've been getting many accolades and thank yous there as well. So I really appreciate it, because I you guys stuck along longer than we thought we would be. But I think that just reflects the enthusiasm that everybody has for what you had to tell them. So thank you to all of you, both our panelists and our mentors, and to all of you. And we will make all this available on a recording. And I think Katie's already sent you the slides. So have a wonderful evening, afternoon, whatever it is, whichever time you're in.
And thank you, Dr. Lustig.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie.